Alrighty, this will be video number 6 covering chapter 6 of the Spark book titled Attention Deficit Running from Distractions. So, as always, I'll go ahead and list my 3 points as well as give an introduction and an application. The first main point that I thought was worth including in the video was surprising new information about ADHD, at least surprising to me. Point number 2 was effective treatment methods for ADHD. And finally, point number 3, how ADHD relates to exercise. So, beginning with an introduction or preface, this is really a topic that hit home with me because I've been diagnosed with ADD in the past. I remember taking medications all the way from elementary school, middle school, even up to high school, and it's still something that I struggle with today, especially keeping my attention grounded on the topic at hand without, I guess you could call it, daydreaming about something else entirely, especially if that particular topic doesn't interest me at all. So just as a general segue, the definition of ADHD, or what we call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, stems from a malfunction of the brain's attention system, and it is a diffuse linkage of neurons that hitches together areas controlling arousal, motivation, reward, executive function, and movement. So, moving on to point number 1, which is again surprising new information about ADHD. The surprising thing that I did not know is that ADHD is more of an inability to direct attention or to focus on command. So it might be more helpful to think of ADHD as an attention variability disorder. So because deficit implies that it is consistent. So the main reason that I thought this was surprising was because I always assumed that those who were diagnosed with ADHD could not hold attention or focus at all. But rather, the book is suggesting that attention is highly variable and it changes constantly. So even though the term ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, suggests that focus is at a deficit, what it really suggests is that focus is varied and can change consistently. Point number 2 is effective treatment methods for ADHD. Something that I thought was interesting that was mentioned in the book was that inattention is always a part of the disorder, but not always hyperactivity. So, for example, hyperactivity is more prominent in children than in adults, but especially in boys. But this being said, the diagnosis is the same for both. So, regardless of whether or not hyperactivity is there, ADD and ADHD have now been termed together, which is also very surprising to me. Paradoxically, one of the best treatment strategies for ADHD is establishing extremely rigid structure in terms of scheduling, along with technical sports, such as ballet, rock climbing, gymnastics, martial arts, so anything that really requires you to think. These technical sports activate an array of brain areas that control balance, timing, sequencing, evaluating consequences, motor skills, but most importantly, intense focus and concentration. So, as we move on to point number 3, how ADHD relates to exercise, it's not simply a matter of whether the signals get through to capture attention, but how fluidly that information travels. So, this is kind of where the attention system ties in with movement and exercise as a whole. So, diving a little bit deeper into that, the areas of the brain that control physical movement also coordinate the flow of information. So, the cerebellum sends information to the prefrontal and motor cortices, which are the centers of thinking and movement. But along the route is a very important cluster of nerve cells called the basal ganglia, which acts as sort of as like an automatic transition. So subconsciously shifting attentional resources as the cortex demands, we can think of these basal ganglia kind of like transmission fluid, if we're referencing cars, like how it did in the book. So it's modulated by dopamine signals, and like I just said, dopamine works like transmission fluid. So if there's not enough, as in the case with people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, attention cannot easily be shifted. So exercise can help raise dopamine levels and thus helps attention normalize to a sense. So finally, as a general application, from the strength and conditioning perspective or a bodybuilding coach. If I have an athlete or a client that has been diagnosed with ADHD, providing them with a very structured program may be beneficial, because like it said in the book, one of the best treatments for ADHD is extremely rigid structure. But almost more importantly, and in addition to this, programming more complex movements that require more thought and more focus, maybe movements such as like an RDL or a Bulgarian split squat, would also be very beneficial and helpful to, activate parts of their brain that would help them in their time outside of the gym as well.